Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. Don Carr and Nick Bowcott joining me today, and we have had the distinct pleasure of getting our hands on the three new Universal Audio amp pedals, the Ruby, the Dream 65, and the Woodrow. Fantastic pedals. And we each sat down and did our own individual demo with one of the pedals. I did the Dream 65, and you were working on the Woodrow, which is a
Tweed Deluxe.
Tweed Deluxe, and Nick, you were working on Ruby.
Yep, and I used my English card as my... I'll take that one, please.
You'll take that one. Yeah, you actually started out with that amp, right?
Yeah,
Originally?
It was my very first amp, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to do it. And got to take my hat off to both James and Tor and the UA team, because I forgot I was playing a pedal emulation. It took me back to those days because I had a really good Vox, and they're a hard amp to capture.
Yeah.
To get that chimey dimension. And it made me play differently. That's the biggest compliment I can give it, and that's probably a blessing for many people watching my videos. Thank goodness he's not playing metal, because you can't. You play, like, it brought out the Brian May within me and the Rory Gallagher, and those are the two guys behind why my first amp was in the Vox AC30. So,
right.
Well done, guys.
Right. The whole idea that they just call them amps, they don't even call them pedals, they actually call them amps, is pretty descriptive, really.
Yeah, it is. It is. The thing for me about the Woodrow that was so revealing was the level of touch sensitivity. Mm-hmm. I mean, input sensitivity in general, and even the settings, because that's one of the hallmarks of that amp, you know, is that it sounds one way with the volume level down, sounds another way with the volume level up, how hard you hit it, what kind of guitar you're playing. I mean, that's really the thing that makes that amp come alive. All there.
Right.
It's all there.
And the one I had was the Dream 65, which is a 65 Deluxe. Mm-hmm. And same thing. I mean, it felt like plugging into an amp. And the other thing that I noticed about it is I tried it with 4 or 5 different guitars. And some modelers, when you plug in different guitars, they still sound like the modeler and not like the guitar. In this case, a Telecaster sounded like a Telecaster, Les Paul sounded like a Les Paul, and so on. I could really hear each of the guitars and what they did interacting with that pedal.
And that's the other thing about the Ruby, just to chime in there, pun intended, awful pun intended. A lot of the great Vox sounds are from a front-ended old amp. And, you know, Mr. Mays was, of course, the Dallas Range Master. That's built in there,
right,
as one of the emulations. And they also used an EP3 on the Brilliant channel and a regular clean boost on the Vibrato channel. And each one has a correct, historically and tonally correct front-ending option built within it, which is great.
Mm-hmm. And again, all three pedals do.
Yeah.
The Dream has a clean boost, and then there's the SRV mod, and then there's also the OD Special, which was the sort of D-style or R-style mod that was done a lot for the 80s studio guys in LA, is in one of the models that's in this as well.
All of these amps have just a huge history. Mm-hmm. I mean, so, you know, people have used them in different ways and in different contexts, and it's like, you want to get as much of that as you can, and man, they really went the long way. And I like that, especially James and Tor, you know, our UA guys, they are so knowledgeable, and they have such an incredible, you know, depth of understanding of those kinds of things, and that they knew what to look for. You know, they knew what amps were going to sound the way they wanted them to sound. They knew what mods to include or not include, and, you know, what, like, boost pedals with the Woodrow and different speakers, and yeah, it just really nailed it.
And actually that brings up a point that I did an interview with James and Tor, where I sat down with them and we talked about the project and what goes into making amps like these in pedal form, and how they found the reference amps that they used and all those things. Let's check that out now. James and Tor, it's great to have you guys join us here to tell us all about this project. I mean, when we found out about the pedals, we were all so excited about them, and now that we've actually had our hands on them, man, we're all blown away. So congratulations.
Oh man,
thanks so much.
Gosh.
Yeah. So tell us about the project. I mean, how did you even, where did the idea come from, and what was kind of the process of creating these pedals?
First of all, this has been a really long project. If we sort of look back to, just starting the algorithms out, we're talking, I mean, James probably know more exact than me, but we're talking 4 or 5 years, maybe even more. That's the amount of time it's taken, even before I started at UA. And it's been 3 different algo developers. So it's, literally 3 different algorithms, completely different, with 3 different developers. So, typically as pedal makers, as guitar product makers, you sit down from time to time, you do brainstorms of, what can we do, what's cool. And obviously, once we've had we had the first 3 pedals out, Astra, Starlight, and Golden, you sort of look at what would be interesting, what would be cool to do on this platform. And one of the really interesting things is that, the platform that we're using for these pedals and the original 3 pedals is so powerful. And we use it to do just one thing basically at a time. And we suddenly realized we can actually run these AMP algorithms that we've been working on the platform, which, was just mind-blowing, because these algorithms are really, really complex, and they take up a lot of computing power. So, even thinking of doing it on something slightly less powerful was just not an option. But we realized we could actually do that, and that just became a no-brainer. So that was really the starting point of it all, just realizing we can actually put these in a pedal and get a quality of emulation that really hasn't been seen before.
Right. So it had to be both fun and overwhelming to sit down and say, okay, let's come up with the list of iconic Vox AC30 sounds, or the list of deluxe sounds, or the list of Tweed amp sounds. I mean, you start naming the players, and we got to include that sound, we got to include that sound, how did you narrow it down to the sounds that you included?
There's probably so many hours a week that we were just sitting in between us talking, like, we need to include this booster, it's got to have this speaker, it's got to have this split speaker, because technically Brian May earlier didn't do this, but his early ones were 2 speakers, and later he had 2 different speakers in the cabinet. So it's like, well, now we have to include these other speakers and it's got to have this treble booster circuit, or it doesn't sound right. So you start going through what was really part of the amp side to give it that magic. So it meant a lot of homework for us, and really saying what was important. And honestly, the biggest thing for us was to respect the amp, basically from the input jack all the way to the speaker. We had to include everything as part of it, because it all mattered. If the amp had vibrato, it's got it. If it had spring, it's got it. It had to have every single oddball to it, so the whole thing would react the same, which we had not seen in a lot of other models. You couldn't find something like, well, I really just want the full AC30 experience from this year and have all the bells and whistles, good and bad. So that was a real challenge for us, to make sure you could walk up to it. If you were like an AC30 nut, that you had certain settings you knew you could pull in there. All the way to, I hate to say, we had the discussion of, well, real ones work in reverse. The knobs are really odd in those amps. They make no sense if you're like a standard Fender person or Marshall person. Like, well, this doesn't look at all sensible to me. And, and it's like, no, we have to leave it. We have to respect that sound, every good and bad sound. If it dies at this sound, if the knob looks weird in this, it had to do that. And I think that was half the fun for us, is just going, well, how do we bring this out to the world where, you get to hear all those sounds, and there's just some really unique sounds in the pedals that, each one of these pedals is such a unique experience. And as Tor mentioned, we had 3 different people all working in parallel for a few years. And when we realized, like, I think we finally have a platform that this will run on, it was pretty exciting, because there's things we design that sometimes don't have a home yet. So it was really great for Tor one day to go, we have all this stuff, then let's try and make this a project. We've got to do this. So It was really him pushing to, like, he knew we had to do this. So it was a long journey. We've both got beards, and I don't think they're going anywhere for a while. But.
So we talked early on in this project, and James, you showed us a sheaf of papers you had with a matrix of all the different guitars you were testing with, and all the different components and all the different things that you were kind of working with. And as you mentioned, the fun part had to be coming up with that. But my question is, the other part of the fun part had to be finding the amps that are actually the gold standards you use to create these pedals.
Oh man. Oh no, it's one of the coolest things, and it's also a large responsibility because there are things that I might like about an amp that somebody else may hate. And it's weird because amps are such a personal thing. You might like an amp for something that I don't use it for. But that was the thing that would sort of say this is you start to boil down the fact of, well, what do they like about the amp? Well, they like changing it to a JBL in the cabinet and running it at 2, whereas I like it at 7 with a Celestion. And you start to veer off and go, okay, everyone kind of likes the same thing, but with these minor tweaks. And that's where the idea of this little boost control that actually morphs depending on what channel you're on. Maybe it's a preamp that's warmer in some cases. Maybe it's a mid-range treble boost. Maybe it's doing all these things. So it gives you the one little tool you need to force it in that direction. Because there are a lot of people in our office that are like, well, I play in a jam band and I need to have that classic Garcia clean sound. Well, put the amp at 2 and use the JBL and it has that sound. But then I'm like, put it on 7 with a Les Paul and I want to have that early 80s sort of rocky or late 70s sound with it. And you realize with these little pieces, the amp could be pretty much everything that the classic amp should do for the rock, the blues, the country player, the jazz player. And then you start to realize how versatile each one of these amps is, because there have been times I'm like, well, I don't see any relationship between Roy Gallagher, John Schofield, and the Edge, but I've seen them all with AC30s. And you realize it's where the knobs go, what the guitar that's driving it, and their hands and how they play, and maybe a pedal or two. That became the thing you saw, which was, now that we've done it, I had to go get all those guitars, all those pedals, learn the riffs, and go, now let's put this under the microscope. Does it change its characteristic depending on what you're giving it? And we weren't signing off until like, can you really play that jangly Tom Petty-ish rhythm and then sound like, We Are the Champions lead sound? And that is stressful. And I'm glad it's done and we did it. And, I'm seriously just really happy that we were able to pull it off, because I felt a big responsibility, because if we don't like our own products, then why would we do this, Right. I wanted to do it for myself, and I'm sure Tor too. We want to have this to play with for ourselves.
Yeah, sure. So Tor, it had to be an interesting thing with so many potential rabbit holes with gear like this, and all the options and things. How do you know when you're done? How do you know when you've reached the end?
I think you're never done. I think luckily one of the things that I don't want to say necessarily makes things easier to do things on physical products like a pedal compared to a plugin is that there are certain constraints, and in a lot of ways that actually helps you a little bit, because it's not like, you can just throw another slider or another knob on that plugin GUI. That's easy to do. So one of the things, and that was actually sort of defining for the project in general, was when the idea came up that we really wanted to make one pedal, one amp. Because one of the things that both James and I have found frustrating about modeling products in the past is that a lot of us have a lot of experience with these real amps, and we know how they work. We know what knobs they are. We know how they sound when you set them in a certain place. And as soon as you start adding more, let's say we would have done one pedal with all these amps in one, it becomes this weird sort of compromise. Suddenly you have like knobs that don't belong on the real amp. Maybe the taper becomes weird or something like that. So, we had a lot of help because, Fender and Vox designed amazing products. And we were just going like, here's that knob, we'll put that on the pedal. Here's that knob, we'll put that on the pedal. So the only things that were really added to that, so to speak, was a couple of little extra things like the room microphone, the different cabinets, and the boost. That was where we were like, oh God, it would have been nice to add this one as well. That would have been cool. There are a couple of things where your heart bleeds a little bit because we couldn't add it, but that's I don't want to say stressful because it's a lot of fun, but that's really where you sort of have to as a product designer, you have to sort of make some really hard choices on behalf of the user. And I get that you can't, kind of like what James said with the sounds. The same thing goes with sort of like the features and the options. If we wanted to throw everything at the user, we could do that, but it would become a pretty annoying experience. And that's where you know that you have to make some hard choices on behalf of the user, because surely there's going to be somebody out there that's going to go like, oh, why didn't they put this cabinet in there? Why didn't they put this speaker in? Because that's what I like. Yeah, that's the tough part, sort of leaving things out like that, I guess.
Yeah, you have to somehow you have to limit things just a little bit. But
Yeah.
the result is, I know Nick and Don and myself, we've all talked about this, that you can just sit down at the pedal and turn the knobs and they sound great. And there's not menus to dive into, and you don't have to worry about all the background stuff, but you can also go deeper, especially with the routing capabilities that the pedals have.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the other thing, which is, we know that obviously there's going to be a large proportion of the customers who are interested in these pedals that are going to basically use them as a substitute for a real amp, which is super cool and super convenient. And, I have you can't see it, but I have a set here on my desk, and it's just the most fun to have my enormous pedal board that's down here and just plug into these different amps, or both of them, two of them at the same time, and do some stereo stuff. It's it's so much fun, and it's something I could never do with real amps, at least not here in this apartment building, right? So having them is just amazing fun.
Do you, one of the capabilities that I find really powerful with these amps, and I know, again, Nick and Don also, was that you can use them direct, which as I agree with you, I think most people are going to use them that way, but there's also the 4-cable method. There's the way you can integrate it with the effects loop in your existing amplifier and take them on stage and get more sounds as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the other part of it, is that we really feel it's important that regardless of how you want to use these pedals, that they're designed to do so, and you can use them and you can get great sounds out of them, because, it might not be as common a thing on digital modelers, but there's no shortage of analog overdrive pedals that are designed to sound like a Grand Marshall or a Black Face with all the knobs on 6, or whatever it is. There's plenty of pedals out there that are designed to make you sound a little bit like a classic amp, and the idea being that you play through a fairly clean amp, and then the pedal does sort of the rest of the job. And we wanted to make sure that we would do that, but not only do that to that degree, but do it even better. So the idea is really, regardless of what sort of setup you have, whether you want to go direct, whether you want to go basically just use it as an overdrive pedal along with your other overdrives, you can do that. Or if you want to plug it into, basically just use the power amp of your real amp, you can do that. Or you can get super nerdy and use a 4-cable method, where you basically, the pedal is sort of handling routing, so you can bypass your preamp of your real amp. When you don't want to use it, you want to use the pedal. And when you bypass the pedal, then you're back to your real amp. So it's really a way of sort of adding an extra channel to your amp, or an extra flavor that wasn't really in the amp. So regardless of how you like your setup and your rig to be, the pedal will cover all these different scenarios.
Right. James, there's the sonic aspect of recreating these different amplifiers, but there are two other aspects that are really important to the player. And one of those is the response of the amplifier to volume control and dynamics and things. And the other is response to your picking technique and how the amp actually feels. How do you incorporate that into a pedal like this?
That's a nightmare. I'll be honest with you. It's one of those things where it's hard to explain what it is until you feel it, and you go, when someone goes, well, it feels really stiff, or it's too squishy, or I don't feel comfortable. Like the AC30 is a real unique one in that it has all this high-end and brittle, jangly stuff, but it's also very compressed. So, because sometimes when we think of a bright, brittle thing, you think, well, that's just going to just be all stiff and feel weird because it's all glassy. The funny thing is it's glassy sounding, but feels squishy, which is really dumb to say out loud. I'm sorry for that. But that's one of the things you find when you put the amp up a little bit, it allows you to ride your volume. So when you roll the volume down, it can clean up. And you get this weird sort of responsiveness back and forth to it. I swear there were days I would listen to I'd strike a G chord and just let it roll for like 10 seconds. And then I would listen to second 7 and go, okay, the real amp is this loud at this. I mean, that sounds crazy, but that's how you would tell. It's almost like a compressor. What is the release time of particularly the voltage? It's interesting how you really have to have this attack, what is the release time, how much of the note, how much of the pick attack gets through. And as you refine that, we have a lot of tools to do that now. So I know when I'm playing it, I go, nope. And then I go use the tools and go, oh, I can see. Literally, it was one day I was like, we're biased too hot. and this is an actual meeting topic, like, I need you to go rebias the amp. But we're talking about software development, but going, dude, it's too hot on the rails. You got to pull it back. It's actually too squishy. And like these were our weekly for a year plus, just finalizing it. Like that was the little stuff we were hearing. It's like when I roll the volume back, it should feel like this. And you have to do that with your ears, your hands, and then half of the science like tools that would do that with all the DSP algo people. So it was a real big handshake of them going, we know you're kind of nuts, but you're probably right. So let's go back and check the sagging rails on something. And
Right.
that's just the easiest way I can explain it is you just got to be the person to go, yeah, but it did this one thing that felt a little off. And then you finally check all those boxes off and go, well, I guess I can't find anything else to complain about. That's kind of, that, and they're like, you should have been done 6 months ago. Then I'll stop complaining, and you put it out. You know.
But it's so funny because there is the whole technical part of really deep diving into it, but there's also this immediate reaction, and it's this subconscious thing that you try one of these amps out and you start playing something that you wouldn't play on the other ends. And when we really sort of felt like now we nailed Ruby was when I got one of the earlier versions of the software, and we put it on the Brilliant channel, cranked it up a bit. And as James said, it's this glassy, chimey thing, but it's really compressed. And because it's so compressed, it almost compels you to play in a certain way where you kind of dig in a little bit more. I was doing that and I wasn't thinking about it. I'm like, oh my God, that's really how I play when I play a real AC30 on the Brilliant channel, because it reacts exactly the same way as I would expect it to. And if I would have played one of the other pedals, I would have played in a different way because it's not the same sound. It's not the same feeling you get.
Right, right. Does that change then when you put pedals in front of it? Because all three of us here tried drive pedals into the amp pedals, and we're experimenting with that as well. And to us, it's just very authentic. It sounds like a pedal into an amp.
No, that was such a big part of it because, as much as, we put some boost circuits inside the pedals, but personally, and I know James is the same way, and we assume that a lot of guitar players will be the same. We love our overdrive pedals and our distortion pedals and our fuzz pedals and our, it's horrible. It's a disease. I have so many pedals, and James has even more. So it was really important for the both of us that the amps would react the same way as a real amp would react when we put a specific pedal in front. And luckily between the two of us, I think we had pretty much every conceivable vintage and modern boutique expensive pedal out there. So we had plenty of opportunities to try how they sound with the amp pedals, and also knowing how they would react with the real amps as well, and being able to A/B those. And that's so important.
Oh God! Yeah. And I think you have pedal boards like this, Mitch, where it's never just the one amp. You've got your favorite overdrives and boosters and your favorite whatever going into that. And if this last piece doesn't respond like the real amp, it destroys that. And because it really this should make everything that you've put together on your board sound just the same as in front of the real amp. So to give you an example, like I'm sure when you're playing, some of my test days would have been, okay, the guitar at like 6 into a fuzz face that was cleaning up a little bit. And then I would listen to what we were working on and then the real amp. And you go back and forth, like, is this responding the same way to this guitar turned down with a fuzz that's cleaning up that the real thing is doing? Because you find a lot of times some things actually sound worse with pedals in front, and they collapse and do weird things. And that was one of the things, like, I should be able to grab a Klon, a Timmy, a Green Rhino, a Fuzz Face, a whatever, and it should do the same thing in front of us as it did to the real amp, which was one of the odd things, especially like actually go back to the Ruby again, is this treble booster circuit adds like 26 dB of crazy gain in front. So you're smashing that thing to bits. And if that didn't work, it would have just sounded terrible. So that was a lot. I mean, my test rig always has a couple of overdrives in front of it. And it had to work. Otherwise, the whole thought of the discussions with Tor and I were, you should be able to get this pedal and go, well, I'm going to just replace my amp today and plug right into this like it's the amp. And if you can't take your pedal board and do that, then we needed to go back to the drawing board.
Right. So one last topic we need to talk about is how did you find the amps that you use to serve as the gold standards? Because obviously there are a lot of vintage amps out there, and just tracking them down had to be an adventure.
Oh man, there was a lot of meetings about it, but honestly, I think it's just you go through your phone and go, who's my friend who's always looking for this amp? There's a little network of these folks who are, hey, if you see one of these, keep an eye out. And so it's a combination of many years of buying gear for myself, and I already have those people who know what I'm always looking for,
Right.
and also a combination of people that have the gear already. So even though sometimes some of the references may not have been an amp we owned, I might have just gone for a couple of days to a friend's place. Like, hey, let me go hear your AC30s today just for a little bit. I just want to double check yours are doing the same thing mine are. Or I need to hear your deluxe, or I'll pull another amp out. So it's always a good thing to sort of re-reference your stuff, going back and re-listening to classic recordings, using other units that I know sounded great. And double checking. I don't know how many phone calls I had where like, hey dude, what transformers in your 63 AC30? You know what the output transformers? Ridiculous stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's a level of insanity that I can't believe I made a job. To be quite honest with you. What it is.
Yeah, I mean, it just has to be crazy to, first of all, just get the picture of the perfect amp in your mind and in your ear, and then go find it, or find the person who has it, or even, track it down.
I wanted NOS tubes. It had to be this specific EL84, this molded rectifier. And I have a small stash of my own, and then asking friends, like, dude, you got a really great set of 6V6s? And there's another boutique amp maker who sent over a Jan set of beautiful 6V6s. Or another friend who let me borrow a pair of, and then gave them to me, Sylvania, this from 1977. And so we're all doing favors for each other. It's like, dude, I really need this specific tube in the preamp stage in V2. It really is like that never-ending tone journey of, well, I heard they use this as the phase inverter. And like, so even if we found the amp, we would still take time and refine. And like any good amp tech would do, they would put in the best sounding preamp tube, not microphonic, maybe one that not too harsh sounding, and rebiasing the amp a bunch of times, making sure it's where it sits, where it settles at. So really, we just made ourselves go crazy because the hardware itself had to always be great sounding.
Right.
And just to add to that, to sort of again highlight the ridiculous amount of time we spend on this, we haven't even started talking about speakers yet.
Oh God,
that's what I was just going to say, is that then there's
because
the speaker thing.
It's the same thing over again, and you might even have to change certain things to the amp circuit when you put in a different speaker, because maybe you don't want it exactly the same.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many EV12Ls I sent back to people on eBay going, this is not stock, it's not original from the 80s. This is wrong. And just trying to find one or two great ones to put in a deluxe, and those are not lightweight speakers. When you get one from, in a shipping package, it also probably erased every magnetic thing around it also. But, and that's just one of the, God knows, 12 plus speakers that we chased around, but you have to want to drive yourself to want to do it, because it became the search. You're like, I need that sound. It has to have that sound I'm used to hearing. It shouldn't just sound like, oh, it sounds like it's been re-EQ'd. No, the whole thing has to change. Because there's going to be somebody who goes, I played that speaker in that amp for 22 years, and if it doesn't sound right to them, then I failed.
Right.
You have to recreate it for the hardcore people. So it was a large responsibility and a whole lot of fun too, honestly.
Well, congratulations, guys. The pedals sound fantastic. We have been having just a blast to try them out and to play with them here, Don, Nick, and myself. And I know we're just so excited to get them in the hands of customers and players and hear what they do with them.
Awesome. So are we, and thanks so much for taking the time to do this.
Well, Thank you, guys. Always a pleasure to hang with you.
Oh, the best.
Likewise, man.
All right, take care, guys. So, man, I mean, obviously so much goes in to making pedals like this. I mean, it's more than just, well, we'll make a pedal. This was years of work.
Their depth of understanding and knowledge, and background and dedication to getting it right, man. Says a lot.
Yeah, I must say I've had the good fortune to know James longer than both of us would probably care to remember, and he defines the ultimate tone chaser.
Yeah.
It's a healthy addiction, and he's got it bad.
Yeah.
So he goes really deep. It's not, I found a Vox AC30 from 63. I found one of the best sounding ever from 63.
Right.
And the same with the 61, and their choice of the front-ending devices as well, because they're fans of it first and foremost, as are we. And that's why I'm excited about the pedals, because they were created by people who genuinely care and wanted to do the best they possibly could. And I think, you know, hats off, guys, you've done well. And that's $10 you owe me, James, for that one.
So it's not just the tones, it's not just the variations on the amps, the speakers, all the things we talked about. There's also all those features. You know, being able to change the foot switch modes, the 4-cable method. I know you, in your video,
Yeah.
tried the 4-cable method with an amplifier.
Yeah, and it works great because I had a Mesa, you know, a Mesa Triple Crown, which, you know, does not have a tweed sounding sort of channel in it at all. Sounded fantastic, man, just through the effects loop.
Right. And so you can use it with your amplifier, you can use it direct into your recording rig, you can put it into a silent rig for house of worship use. You could do, I mean, there's just so many things you can do with this. What James told me was that he wanted it so that if you unplugged from your amplifier and plugged into the pedal, that you didn't notice a difference, that it was pretty much the same. And to my ears and to my touch, I think they achieved it.
Yeah.
I would agree. And I have to say, too, is the presets that you've got access to are really, really cool. Great starting points. You can go in, pick one you like, tweak it to your heart's content, then resave it as yours. That's what I did. Plagiarism at its highest.
No, they're great starting points, but I found several where didn't even really need to tweak them too much, just maybe set the output volume level to match what you want. And they also play, of course, super nicely with the other Universal Audio pedals, but with any pedals. I plugged a Wampler Tumnus into the front end and used it as an overdrive with the Dream 65. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, I was really, again, back to that whole, like, you know, the response of the front end of the pedal is just amazing, you know, and the architecture all the way down through the pedal, the way it responds. Did the same thing. I put a boost in front of it and it was like, sounded great, man.
Yeah.
And I'll say from the other end of this thing, I was so impressed with the pedal, much as I wanted to add stuff, I felt I didn't need to. I played it en natural, if you will, because it stood up by itself. If I wanted more ambience, just tweak the room, make it a bit, pull those mics out a bit into the room they've modeled, and it's great.
Yeah. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm kind of thinking I'm going to have to collect all three.
Yeah, I know. I'm so convinced with the Woodrow. I'm really anxious to try out the other two, definitely.
Yeah, I would have to concur with that. And I've got one thing I'd like to add. James, I know you're watching this. Marshall next, please. Marshall next. Buggy.
Guys, thanks for sitting down and chatting about these amazing new pedals. And I'm anxious to check out your demo videos on your respective pedals as well. And,
Yeah.
man, super cool stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for joining us here today. Be sure to check out the 3 individual demo videos we did on the 3 separate pedals to learn a lot more about them and to hear a lot more playing examples as well. You're going to want all 3 of them. I'll just go ahead and say it.
Yep.
I'm Mitch Gallagher, Don Carr, Nick Bowcott. Thanks for joining us today.